Hello and welcome back. We are continuing Nancy Drew number 1, The Secret of the Old Clock. We are on chapter 13. Chapter 13, An Adventure. Nancy Drew had made up her mind to visit the Tompkins cottage the very next day, but in making her plans she had counted without Helen Corning and her friends. They were unwilling that she should be alone even for a minute. From the moment she awoke in the morning and sniffed the fragrant odor of the pines, she was rushed from one thing to another. After a breakfast of fruit, fried eggs, crisp bacon, and hot cornbread, she was pressed into a tennis game. The afternoon was devoted to swimming and water polo. By evening, Nancy Drew was so tired she could scarcely keep her eyes open, and she was thankful for the opportunity of tumbling into bed. Tomorrow I simply must find a way to visit the Tompkins cottage, she told herself just before she dropped off to sleep. Immediately after breakfast the following morning, Helen Corning announced the plan for the day. The girls have decided on an all-day hike into the woods, Nancy. You'll go, won't you? Nancy groaned. You're wearing me to a frazzle, Helen. Please let me off this time. I like to stay in camp today and just rest up. Well, all right, Helen agreed unwillingly. I'll stay with you. Oh, no, Nancy protested vigorously. I won't let you do that. You like to hike so well. Please go on. I'll have a good time all by myself. Really, I will. I don't like to leave you, Nancy, but if you insist. I do, Helen. Please don't worry about me. I'll have a good time here. If you don't mind, I may take the launch out while you're gone. If you do, you better not go far, Helen advised her. We girls bought it second hand for a song, and it's my private opinion the engine isn't much good. I'll be careful, Nancy promised. She could scarcely hide her eagerness to be off, but she was forced to wait until Helen and her friends had started on their hike. It seemed to Nancy that they would never leave, but at last they trudged away with their knapsacks slung over their shoulders. You'll wish you had gone too, Helen called back over her shoulder. As soon as the girls were out of sight, Nancy hurried down to the launch, which was tied to the dock not far from the camp. She examined the engine. She had frequently hand-led motorboats, but never one of this particular make. I believe I can manage it all right. If only I can get the engine started, Nancy told herself. She discovered a pin sunk in the rim of a flywheel, and after adjusting other parts, pulled it out rather timidly. She gave the wheel a vigorous turn to the right. She tried again, swinging it farther and snapping back hard. To her delight, the engine began to roar. Cutting down the motor, Nancy steered out into deep water. At first she followed the shore, but as she became more familiar with the wheel and as the engine appeared to work perfectly, she headed out into the lake. Nancy experienced a real thrill as the little launch responded to her hand. The lake was as smooth as glass, and there was scarcely a cloud in the sky. As the launch cut through the water, a tiny spray blew in Nancy's face, but she did not mind. Far ahead she could see the opposite shore, and she headed straight for the point where she knew the Tompkins bungalow was located. If only the caretaker would let me in when I get there, she thought as she drew near her objective point. But she was doomed never to reach the opposite shore that day, for unexpectedly there was a miss in the steady throb of the engine. The motor gave one long, slow wheeze and died. Oh, what can have to it now? Nancy cried anxiously. I can't have run out of gasoline. An examination of the tank revealed that it was nearly full. Nancy studied the engine doubtfully. Like most girls, she had never interested herself in the mechanics of what made wheels go round. Hateful thing, she murmured. I believe it stopped on purpose. Too late. Nancy recalled that her chum had warned her about the engine. Now, as she glanced toward shore, she saw no hope of rescue. She was within sight of the Thompson bungalow, which appeared deserted, but miles from her own camp. For nearly an hour she worked over the engine, but her efforts were useless. The stubborn motor refused to start. I'll have to sit out here all day, Nancy thought miserably. This means I won't get to visit the Tompkins cottage after all. It was especially tantalizing to be so close to the bungalow and yet know that she could not reach it. Nancy was tempted to swim, but she gave up the idea almost as quickly as it occurred to her, for she realized that even if she reached the Tompkins bungalow, she would have no means of returning to camp. She decided that it would be better to remain on the lake and wait for a passing boat to rescue her. Slowly, the hours dragged on, and the launch drifted further and further from shore. Never had time seemed to pass so monotonously. There's one thing certain, Nancy Drew told herself. If I ever get out of this launch, I'll never set foot in it again. The camp boat seemed to be the only one on the lake, and as the day wore on, she began to wonder if she ever would be rescued. The sun beat down upon her, and with the passing hours, she became hungry as well as uncomfortable. After today, I'll never have another chance to visit the Thompson bungalow alone, she thought. Helen means well, but she will stay with me every minute. I think the best thing I can is is to tell her I'm starting for home tomorrow. That is, if I'm ever lucky enough to reach shore. On my way back to River Heights, I'll stop at the Thompson cottage. Helen will be disappointed, but it can't be helped. For want of other occupation, Nancy turned her attention again to the engine. When the sun sank into the water several hours later, she was still bending over it, a determined look in her eyes. There, she muttered as she straightened up. I've certainly done enough to it. If it won't go now, it never will. She gave the wheel a vicious swing, and to her astonishment, the engine began to its steady roar as unconcerned as though it had never stopped. If that isn't a limit, Nancy exclaimed in wonder. Hopefully, she glanced toward the shore, but already shadows were beginning to lurk among the trees, and she knew that in less than an hour it will be dark. It's too late to visit the bungalow tonight, she decided regretfully. I better get back to camp before this engine changes its mind again. Obedient to her will, the little launch plowed through the water toward camp, its engine laboring faithfully. As she eased up to the dock, Nancy saw Helen and her friends just trudging into camp. They hailed her with delight. I'm nearly dead, Helen announced. You were smart to stay in camp, Nancy. She stopped abruptly and stared at her chum. Why, you're all sunburned and you're covered with grease. What have you been doing? Taking a sunbath, Nancy laughed. By the way, Helen, you were right about that engine, but I didn't think it would give you any more trouble this summer. Anyway, I've donated 8 hours to the cause. 8 hours, Helen gasped. You've not been out on that lake all that time. It served me right, I guess. I should have gone on the hike. But while Nancy made light of her adventure, she was disappointed. She had wasted a day, and time was precious. Would she ever reach the Thompson bungalow? So far, she had been thwarted at every turn. And that was chapter 13. Chapter 14, An Exciting Discovery. Nancy Drew, why are you packing that suitcase? You're not leaving camp already. Helen Corning, entering the cabin which she shared with Nancy, stopped in the doorway and stared in amazement at her chum, who was folding wearing apparel carefully into her suitcase. I'm afraid I must leave this afternoon, Nancy admitted regretfully. But you've been here only 3 days, Helen protested. Don't you like the camp? Oh, I've had a wonderful time, Nancy cried impulsively. And the girls have been so nice to me. I'd love to stay, but I can't. There's something important I must attend to at once. Can it wait? I'm afraid not. I've waited too long already. But the dance, Nancy, you don't want to miss it. I don't want to, Helen, but I really must go this afternoon. I can't understand what's made you change your mind so suddenly. It wasn't that hard experience in the launch, was it? Nancy Drew laughed, shook her head. She could not tell Helen her real reason for departing. So long as she remained at camp, she knew that Helen and her friends would not leave her alone for a minute. It would be impossible to visit the Thompson bungalow on the opposite side of the lake without offering explanations, and Nancy was unwilling to disclose the purpose of her trip. In spite of Helen's teasing, she remained firm in her decision to leave camp. Directly after luncheon, she slung her suitcase into the roadster and took leave of the girls. Regretfully, they watched her go. Now, if only I could find my way to the Thompson bungalow, Nancy thought. The previous day, she had casually inquired from Helen which road led to the Thompson bungalow, but the directions had been rather hazy. Coming to a fork, she selected the left-hand road, which appeared to circle the lake. As Helen had indicated, it was winding and narrow, and richly sprinkled with sharp rocks. From camp it was comparatively easy to reach the Thompson bungalow by launch, but the distance around the lake was nearly 8 miles. Nancy was forced to drive slowly, and had she met another car, it would have been difficult to have passed. In places, the road was muddy, for overhanging trees and bushes protected the moist earth from the rays of the sun. The going was especially hard because of two deep ruts, which apparently had been made by a heavy truck. I wonder what a truck was doing up this road, Nancy mused somewhat curiously. The tracks appeared to have been made today, too. As she drove along, she noticed a number of summer cottages, but as the season was late, nearly all were boarded up. At last she came within sight of a clearing, and through the trees caught a glimpse of the Thompson bungalow. I hope I'll find the caretaker, she thought. I'd certainly hate to go back without seeing him. Not without a feeling of anxiety, she stopped the roadster at the edge of the road. To her surprise, she observed that the tracks made by the truck did not continue further. Apparently, the truck had turned in toward the bungalow. Nancy hurried up the path. As she emerged from among the trees, she stopped short and stared ahead in amazement. The entire camp was in disorder. The front door of the bungalow had been flung wide open, and the side doors were likewise ajar. An overturned chair had been dropped carelessly on the porch, and a trail of knickknacks stretched from the house to the path. The grass had been trampled, and there were peculiar marks in the soft earth. "There's something strange about this," Nancy murmured. Quickly she bent down to examine the marks, which were clearly visible. At a glance she saw that the footprints had been caused by heavy boots, and there were long lines evidently caused by dragging boxes and furniture across the lawn. "I think I'm beginning to see the light," Nancy told herself. "Now I know what that truck was doing on this road. Unquestionably, it was a moving van, and it came here." Again she examined the imprints in the soft earth. These marks couldn't have been made more than an hour ago at the latest, she decided. As she hurried up on the path, it appeared to Nancy that the camp was deserted. There was no sign of Jeff Tucker, the colored caretaker in whose care the bungalow had been entrusted. Reaching the veranda, Nancy knocked loudly on the door. When there was no response, she boldly entered. "What can this mean?" she asked herself in dismay as she stared at the sight before her. The living room was in confusion, save for a few pieces. It was bare of furniture. Even the draperies and curtains had been ripped from the rods. The rugs were missing, as was everything else of value. To Nancy's astonishment, she found that with the exception of one room, the entire house had been ransacked. Only one bedroom had been left practically untouched, and as she stepped into it, she noticed that the rug had been rolled up and securely tied as though in preparation for moving. As Nancy gazed at the disorder about her, she searched her mind for an explanation. What could it mean? "It looks like a case of ordinary robbery to me," she reasoned. Nancy had frequently read of cases where the summer homes of wealthy persons had been stripped of furniture and rugs by unscrupulous robbers who sold the valuables to second-hand dealers in fences. In recent years, there have been a number of thefts in the vicinity of Moon Lake, and as a protective measure, many of the cottage owners employed caretakers the year around. What had become of Jeff Tucker, the colored man who had been left in charge of the Thompson bungalow? The place seemed deserted. Nancy realized that the Thompson bungalow, which had been expensively furnished, would offer a rich prize for thieves. Now, as she viewed the evidence, the suspicion which lurked in her mind developed into firm conviction. She was certain that robbers had ransacked the place, carrying off nearly everything of value. "He must have taken the Crowley clock, too," Nancy told herself with a sinking heart. "If they have, I'll never set eyes on it." A feeling of desperation came over the girl as she realized that again she had been thwarted. It seemed almost as though a cruel fate had ordained that the mystery of the missing Crowley will should forever remain unsolved. "It's barely possible the robbers overlooked the clock," Nancy thought hopefully. She began to look around in nooks and corners of the bungalow. She opened the closets and poked about in drawers, but her search was in vain. She found no clock. As Nancy returned to the bedroom, she regarded it meditatively. Why had the robbers left this one room practically untouched? Certainly the furniture was as valuable as that which they had taken. Unquestionably the thieves had intended to strip the room, for they had rolled up the rug. I wonder if they heard me coming and were frightened away. Nancy asked herself, I didn't see a sign of their truck, and yet I'm sure they couldn't have left here many minutes before I arrived. As the thought occurred to her, she glanced uneasily over her shoulder. She realized that she was buried in a wilderness some miles from the nearest house, and the knowledge that unscrupulous men were in the vicinity was anything but reassuring. What if those robbers should still be around here? Flashed to her mind. As Nancy Drew listened tensely, the very silence of the empty house was startling. A strange feeling came over her. She could almost sense that someone was watching her every movement. We're on chapter 15, A Desperate Situation. How silly of me to be afraid, Nancy Drew laughed nervously. Probably there isn't a person within miles of here. As she glanced about the bungalow, it was with relief that she assured herself the place was deserted. Yet for some reason she was unable to free herself entirely from the feeling that an unseen danger lurked in wait for her. The very walls seemed to smirk and grimace at her, and there was an ominous something in the air. Now that Nancy felt certain that the Crowley clock had been stolen, she was anxious to get away from the Thompson bungalow as quickly as possible. I'll drive to the nearest town and report the robbery to the police, she decided. Those men won't be able to travel very fast with a heavy moving van. There's a chance that they may be caught yet. Having made the decision, Nancy moved toward the front door. Passing a window, she chanced to glance out, and what she saw caused her to pause in sheer fright. A heavy-set man with a cap pulled low over his eyes was coming up the path toward the house. For a moment, Nancy Drew was held in a paralysis of fear. She was positive that the man who was coming toward her was one of the members of the robber band. Only an instant did the girl hesitate. Then she turned and ran back into the bedroom. Too late, she saw that she had trapped herself, for this room had no outside door. Nancy started back toward the living room, but before she had taken half a dozen steps, she realized that her escape had been cut off from that direction. The man had reached the veranda steps. Frantically, she glanced about for a hiding place. The bedroom closet offered the only possible refuge, and with scarcely an instant's hesitation, she stepped into it and closed the door behind her. Nancy was not a minute too soon. Scarcely had she shut the door when she heard the heavy tread of a man's hobnail shoes on the floor. Peeping cautiously out through a tiny crack in the door, she saw a rough-looking man come into the bedroom. His face was cold and cruel. As he turned toward the closet where she huddled, Nancy Drew held her breath, scarcely daring to breathe naturally lest her presence be detected. Apparently the man noticed nothing amiss, for his eyes rested only casually on the closet door. Nancy's hiding place was anything but comfortable. It was dark and musty, and old clothing hung from nails. As dust assailed her nostrils, she held a handkerchief to her face, lest she sneezed. If I sneeze, they'll be sure to find me, she told herself. They'll know well enough it isn't an animal, even a cat. She felt around and once came close to catching her hand on a sharp nail. Then she felt something soft on a shelf and imagined it was a sleeping cat. She drew back, then felt more cautiously. Only an old fur cap, she told herself in disgust, and probably full of moths. Gracious, now I feel like sneezing worse than ever. She held her hand over her mouth hard and waited in agony, but presently the desire to sneeze passed, and Nancy breathed more freely. When she dared to peep out through the crack a second time, she saw that two other men had come into the room. From their appearance, she knew that they must be members of the robber gang. The first man seemed to be their leader, for he proceeded to issue orders. "Get a move on," he growled. "We haven't got all day unless we want to be caught. Take that dresser out of here first." The two men lifted the heavy piece of furniture and started with it to the door. But they did not move swiftly enough to satisfy the leader, and he berated them savagely. "If you were in such a hurry, why didn't you back the van up to the door instead of leaving it hidden in the bushes?" one of the men retorted angrily. "Yes, and have someone see us from the road," sneered the leader. "We'll carry this out yourself if you think it's so light." From her hiding place, Nancy Drew watched the men as they deliberately stripped the room of everything valuable. Piece by piece, they carried out the furniture, but the girl was given no opportunity to escape. For the leader of the gang remained in the room while the others made the trip to the van. "Well, I guess we have everything now," the leader muttered at last. He turned to follow his companions, who already had gone to the truck, but in the doorway paused for a last careful survey of the room. At that fateful moment there came a muffled sneeze from the closet. The robber wheeled about, walking directly to the closet. He flung open the door and exposed poor Nancy, who was crouching in the far corner. Angrily, he jerked her out. "Spying on us, eh?" he snarled. Nancy Drew eyed the man defiantly. "I wasn't spying. Then what were you doing in that closet?" "I came to see the caretaker." "Looking for him in a funny place, ain't you?" sneered the man. Nancy realized that she was in a desperate situation. The look on the robber's face frightened her. "I heard someone coming, and I was afraid," she explained lamely. "Well, it was unhealthy business that brought you here," the man told her sharply. "What did you hear in the closet?" Without giving her an opportunity to answer the question, he added with a scowl, "I warn you, this will be the last time you ever stick your nose in business that doesn't concern you." As Nancy saw the expression on the man's face, there was no mistaking the ugly threat. One glance assured her that she could expect no mercy. The hopelessness of her situation gave her the courage to defy him. "I didn't hear much, but I saw plenty," she cried. "You're nothing but a common thief, and if I get the chance I'll turn you and your gang over to the police." "If you get the chance, that's good," the robber laughed mirthlessly. "I'll do with you as I did the caretaker." "The caretaker?" Nancy gasped in horror. "What have you done with him?" "You'll find out all in good time." The man held Nancy's wrists in a vice-like grip. Her efforts to free herself were of no avail. "It won't do you any good to try to get away," her captor informed her. Nancy was desperate. Suddenly, utilizing every ounce of her strength, she gave her imprisoned wrists a quick upward jerk. As the action tore her hands free, she darted for the door. With a cry of rage, the robber was after her. Almost in one long leap, he overtook her, caught her roughly by the arm, and forced her against the wall. "Not much you don't," he snarled. Nancy Drew struggled this way and that. She twisted and squirmed, she kicked and clawed, but she was powerless in the grip of the man. "Little wildcat, you won't do any more scratching when I get through with you." "Let me go," Nancy cried, struggling harder. The man half carried, half dragged her across the room. Opening the closet door, he flung her roughly inside. Nancy heard a key turn in the lock. The sliding of a bolt into place followed. "Now you can starve for all I care," the man laughed harshly. Then the steady tramp of his heavy boots across the floor told Nancy Drew that he had left the house. Chapter 16. Left to starve. When the sound of the footsteps had died away, Nancy Drew was overcome with panic. A feeling of desperation came over her. She realized that the robber had dared to carry out his ugly threat. He had locked her in the closet and had left her there to starve. At first, Nancy was too frightened to think logically. She beat frantically upon the door with her fists, but the heavy oak panels did not give. "Help! Help!" she screamed. At last, exhausted by her efforts to force the door open, she fell down upon the floor, a dejected, crushing little figure. "Maybe those men will come back later and let me out," she tried to encourage herself. "Surely they can't be so heartless as to leave me here to starve." But even as the thought came to her, she heard the muffled roar of a heavy truck as it passed the Thompson bungalow on the way to the road. With a feeling of utter hopelessness, Nancy heard the van depart. She knew for a certainty the cruel, hardened rascals were indifferent to her plight. They had abandoned her to a horrible fate. The house was as silent as a tomb. Although Nancy had little hope that there was anyone within miles of the cottage, she again raised her voice and shouted for help. Her cries echoed through the empty house and seemed to mock her. "Oh, why didn't I have sense enough to tell Helen Corning where I was going?" she thought miserably. "She believed I was starting for home. The girls will never dream that I came here." And her father thought that she intended to remain at the camp for a week. He would not become alarmed over her absence until it was too late. Oh, if only she had never left her home in River Heights. "Someone may find my roadster at the side of the road," Nancy reasoned, "but it isn't very likely. Few persons pass this way so late in the season." What had become of Jeff Tucker, the caretaker? Certainly she could expect no aid from that quarter. The robber had hinted that he had done away with the old colored man, and knowing the character of the rascals, it was impossible not to believe the worst. As the full significance of the situation dawned upon the girl, panic again took possession of her. In a desperate attempt to break down the door, she threw her weight against it, again and again. She pounded upon the panels until her fingers were bruised and bleeding. At last she sank down on the floor to rest and tried to force herself to reason calmly. "I'm only wasting my strength this way. I must try to think logically. If I don't, I'm lost." Nancy Drew recalled that she had once read that it was possible to pick a lock with a hairpin. Feeling in her hair, she found a heavy wire one and began to work at the lock. But in the darkness she could not see, and she made little progress. After 15 minutes she gave the task up in disgust. "It's no use," she decided miserably. "I'm afraid I'll never get out." She began to think of her father, of Helen Corning, and other dear friends. Would she ever see them again? As despondency claimed Nancy, she was dangerously near tears. Resolutely, she tried to shake off the mood. "This will never do," she told herself sternly. "Surely there is a way to get out of here. I must keep my head and try to think of something." After a time, as a new idea occurred to the girl, she began to rummage about in the closet, hoping that By some lucky chance, she might find a tool which would help her force the lock of the door. She searched carefully through the pockets of every garment which hung from the hooks. She groped over every inch of the floor. She found nothing of value, and the cloud of dust which was stirred up made breathing more difficult than before. The closet had become uncomfortably warm by this time. Then, unexpectedly, Nancy's head struck something hard. Quickly investigating, she discovered a narrow wooden rod suspended overhead. Evidently it had once been used for dress and coat hangers, as it was fastened to either wall and ran the length of the closet. If I can get that rod down, I might be able to use it to break out a panel of the door, Nancy thought hopefully. It feels strong, and it's about the right size. She tugged at the rod with all her might. To her satisfaction, one side gave. Another hard jerk brought the rod down on her head. To her bitter disappointment, Nancy found as she examined the rod that it was too long to use as a ram. But after a little experimentation, she discovered that she could press it into service as a wedge. Inserting it into the crack between the hinges, she threw all her weight against the rod. At first, the door did not budge. Archimedes didn't know what he was talking about when he said the world could be moved with a lever, Aunt Nancy murmured. I'd like to see him move this door. As she applied steady pressure to the rod a second time, she saw that the hinges were beginning to give. Encouraged, she applied more force. It's coming, she cried. Once more she threw her weight against the rod. A hinge tore from the casing, and the door sagged. It was now easy to insert the wedge, and Nancy knew that success would soon be hers. Then, just as another hinge gave way, she was startled to hear footsteps. Someone came running into the bedroom, and a heavy body hurled itself against the door of the closet. The unexpected action stunned Nancy. Could it be that one of the robbers had heard the noise she had made and had returned to make sure that she did not escape? She discarded the theory as quickly as it came to her. The robbers were far too wise to tarry once their disgraceful work had been accomplished. Then, too, she had heard their moving van leave. Frantically, Nancy rattled the doorknob. "Oh, you is a caged lion this time," a rather unsteady voice remarked. "You is one o' these tough robber boys, is you? Well, you won't do no more pilfering, 'cause I done got you surrounded." "Let me out," Nancy pleaded. "I'm not a robber." The sound of a feminine voice coming from the closet nonplussed the man. "Say, robber boy, is you intimidating a lady's voice to throw me off the scent? If you is, it won't do no good, 'cause it's a natural born two-legged bloodhound." Nancy thought of a way to convince him. She let go her longest and loudest feminine scream. "That's enough. Hold your siren. I'll let you out. Darn ain't man in the world could make a racket like that. 'Tis way out, lady." Expectantly, Nancy waited, but the door did not open. "My lordy," she heard her horror. "It's done it, gone and misplaced the key." We are on chapter 17, Jeff Tucker's story. There was another long wait, and then, to her relief, Nancy Drew heard a key turn in the lock, and then a bolt shot back. Quickly, she pushed the closet door open and stepped out into the light. She stood face to face with Jeff Tucker, the colored caretaker employed by the Tompkins. The robbers had led her to believe that they had harmed the old fellow, and Nancy was glad to see him well and happy, albeit a little too happy, for Jeff Tucker plainly had a bit too much to drink. Jeff still knew very well what was going on about him, but a certain alcoholic glitter in his eyes and and his somewhat unsteady stance informed Nancy that he was not just as sober as the proverbial judge. She suspected that while he had been absent on his convivial celebration, the robbers had made off with the Tompkins furniture, for even in his condition of semi-inebriety, Jeff seemed to realize that something was amiss. He stared at Nancy, then his eyes roved about the topsy-turvy room. "Say, white girl, you tell me where all this furniture is at." Nancy smiled in spite of herself at the old caretaker's bewilderment, for try as he might, he evidently could not rationalize the situation. "The most defiant and definite information I can give you," she said, "is that some robbers carted it away. If you had been here attending to your duty, it would never have happened." "Oh, that's right. That's right. Blame me. I ain't supposed to be no standing. It's just a plain cold man with a wife and 7 children depending on me. No, Mom, ain't having no truck with them machine gun boys." Jeff paused and passed his hand over his forehead as if he were trying to wipe away the alcoholic cobwebs that were accumulating about his perceptive faculties. And suddenly he pointed a bony finger at Nancy and demanded, "How come you here?" "That's a fine question for you to ask," replied Nancy indulgently, "but I don't mind telling you. I arrived just as the robbers were hauling off the last of the furniture. They locked me in the closet. I must have been here for hours." "You was in that closet all that time?" Jeff's voice suddenly took on a pathetic tone. "You poor child. Suppose you had starved to death in there, or in the house had burned down, or, or you was scared in the fits. There now, Jeff, don't take on about what might have happened to me. I'm all right." Nancy determined to try persuasion on the old fellow in order to find out what had happened to him. "Tell me, where were you last night?" she suggested gently. "Well, miss, it was this way. I was out in the yard chewing around last night and thinking how I wished I was someplace where I wasn't. Just any place. I don't mind where. I was just all fed up being a caretaker and care taking care all this truck from morning to night. It ain't such an exciting life, miss. And while it's done sowed me mad wild oats, I still sow a little rye now and then. Yes, Jeff, I can smell that on your breath right now." Jeff wiped the back of his hand over his mouth in an apparent effort to keep his rye-laden breath from being propagated into the atmosphere. "You can't blame me, miss," he protested. "He gave it to me." "Who is this he?" "Why, that white man who drives up in the big sedan. He sees me out there and knows how lonesome and useless I feels. So he said, 'Jeff, hop in. I know a place where.' So I hops. Course I locked up this house and see that everything was safe. Safe? From the looks of this room, one could hardly call it that. Oh well, miss, it looks safe, and I felt safe too when we whizzed off in that big car. This white man, he says, 'Jeff, how about a little drink?' And I say, 'I don't mind seeing it's you.' Then I had one and some more too, I guess, 'cause after a while I didn't feel like I was riding in no automobile at all. I thought it was a chariot that had gone swung low, and I was being wafted off to some place in general direction of heaven." "Well, that was a fine thing to do, I must say," Nancy commented. "Then what happened?" "I came to. I see I ain't in no chariot, but I was in a hotel, and now I'm in a bed, and it's feeling powerful sickish like and discouraged. Well, I get my clothes on, and I see my keys to the house. It's done been pilfered. Then I tries to recollect what done come to pass, and I get suspicious. I say to myself, 'Jeff, how come that white man so friendly? How come he give you drinks that cost $4 a pot? How come you ain't got no keys? Black boy, bestir yourself, and here I is.' Oh, yes, you're here all right," Nancy returned severely, "and a fine mess you've made of it, too. What do you think Miss Thompson will say when she learns?" Jeff rolled his eyes. "Lawdy, miss, what will she say? I reckon I done gone and discharged myself." "It would be only what you deserve, Jeff. You were unfaithful to your trust." "What you mean, miss? Trust? I don't trust nobody no more, especially no footloose white boys traveling around in sedans. You don't understand. I mean, you didn't treat Miss Thompson right in going off." "I reckon you right, Miss." Old Jeff done gone and made a fool of himself. I realize that whatever I gets, I got it coming. A tear rolled out of Jeff's black furrowed old cheek, and he wiped it away with his handkerchief. "There, Jeff," Nancy said consolingly. "Let's forget about what has been done and think about what we can do to straighten things out. I'll try to help you. We must report the robbery to the police right away. Is there a telephone in the house?" "No, miss. We ain't got no telephone here. We always use the RFD. Then we shall have to go to town as quickly as we can in my car. Do you suppose that you would recognize the man who enticed you away, Jeff?" "Say, would I remember him? I recognized that man in a bootlegs convention. He was tall and slick looking with a kind of gimme look in his eyes. Yes, Mom, I sure would know that baby." Before leading the way to her roadster, Nancy Drew thought of the old Crowley clock again and all that it might mean in solving of the mystery of the will. Jeff, as caretaker, would surely know whether or not it was in the bungalow before the robbery. Tell me something, Jeff, she said. Was there an old clock in the house? A tall, square-faced mantel clock? Yes, miss. But all I ever done to it was dust it. I never wound it up to see if it would run. I got a watch of my own. Jeff punctuated his remarks by taking a large silver open-faced watch from his pocket and holding it to his ear. She's done run down too. I reckon that I was in that hotel when I should have been tending to this watch. Never mind the watch, Jeff. You sure there was a clock in the house then? Oh, it's dead rights on that, miss. I recollect that clock just as plain as day. I wouldn't forget that clock. Nope, never. Nancy now felt almost certain that this was the clock which contained a notebook telling of what disposal had been made of the Crowley will, and that it had been stolen by the robbers. She must recover the clock, and there was only one way. The thieves must be apprehended and the stolen good returned. With this thought in her mind, she rushed out toward her roaster, calling to Jeff to follow. "It's a comin', miss," Jeff called. "Just a minute." He half hobbled off the house out of Nancy's sight while she sat waiting impatiently in her roadster. She started the engine and warmed it up, but Jeff still failed to return. She called to him, but there was no response. Finally, she could stand the suspense no longer. Jumping to the ground, she set off to find what had become of the old scamp. She found Jeff leisurely performing an elaborate facial ablution at the cistern pump. He would pump his hands full of water and then, with a great spluttering noise, dash it against his face. "For goodness sakes, Jeff," said Nancy, provoked, as she came upon him, "don't you realize I've been waiting for you? These robbers will probably be in the next state before we even succeed in notifying the police. Excuse me, miss, but I's taking a little wash. I see you are, but can't that wait? But this wash is important. I just want it to be good and sober before I go into that police station. And this cold water is good for what ails me. Coax, wheedle, or threaten." Nancy was unable to hurry Jeff a minute. But at last he had finished, and Nancy, with a sigh of relief, loaded him into the waiting roadster. As she stepped upon the accelerator and the car moved slowly out onto the highway, she wondered where the old Crowley clock was now, and whether she would ever be able to recover it from the thieves. Chapter 18, Notifying the Police. It was probably fortunate for Nancy Drew that the traffic police were not patrolling the road, for as she opened the throttle wider and wider, her roadster responded with a surge of power that sent the car along at breathtaking speed. "'Tis old Bus can sew a step," observed Jeff. "Suppose it turns turtle." "Don't worry, Jeff, it won't. I know this roadster." Nancy Drew did know the limit to which she dared go. She guided the car skillfully, and in a short time they were entering the outskirts of Melbourne, the nearest town to the Thompson bungalow. "Better slow down, miss," Jeff cautioned. "The marshals of this town is mighty persnickety about how folks acts. He's run me in more than once. For speeding? No, just for enjoying myself. And I suppose you can tell me where the jail is." "'Deed I can, miss. I sure can. Fact is, this is my favorite jail. You goes right down Central Avenue to Maple Street and turns to the left, and there you is." The roadster stopped in front of the building with a lurch, and Nancy stepped out briskly, with Jeff following at a mere leisurely gait. "I must see an officer," Nancy announced as she entered the office. "I want to report a robbery." A buzzer rang, and soon a marshal, followed by several men, entered. Nancy quickly told them all she knew about the Thompson robbery, and to corroborate what she had said, she called Jeff for his version. "She speaks the truth," testified Jeff, "except she don't make it strong enough. First thing, they kidnaps me so I won't be around to raise no ruckus. Then they gives me some kind of a sleeping powder and puts me in a hotel. But I comes to and goes back, and there I find this girl cooped up in a closet just as she told you. And they wrecked Miss Thompson's house and stole all the furniture." The marshal and his men listened attentively and plied Nancy with questions to clear up certain points. "Have you any idea which road they took?" the marshal asked her. "Yes, sir. I examined the tire tracks where the thieves had backed the truck up to the house and noticed the pattern they made in the turf. When we passed the road crossing a few miles out of town, I saw the same tracks just off to the side of the road where they had slipped off in turning their truck northward." "Can you lead the way?" "Yes, I'll do everything in my power to help." The marshal terminated the interview by giving curt orders to his deputies. "Get your automobile started," he directed Nancy. We'll follow in the police car. Hurry, Nancy begged as she turned toward the door. Those men have nearly an hour's start of us now. Hastily, she ran to the street and sprang into the roadster. Starting the motor, she waited impatiently for the marshal and his men to appear. After a seemingly interminable wait, they came out, buckling on holsters. They piled into the police car, which stood at the curbing, and the marshal took the wheel. After several unsuccessful attempts, he started the motor. Jeff Tucker, who had followed the men from the office, would have inflicted his person upon the already overburdened car, but as he attempted to gain the running board, he was forced gently but firmly back upon the sidewalk. Follow me, Nancy cried to the marshal. Shifting gears, she started off down the road. At the corner, she looked back to see that the police car was following and caught a glimpse of Jeff Tucker, who stood gazingly mournfully after the departing automobiles. At the edge of town, Nancy selected the road which she felt certain the robbers had taken. Her high-powered roadster was built for speed, and several times she was forced to slow down in order that the marshal and his men might keep her in sight. Nancy had gone perhaps 8 or 9 miles when unexpectedly she came to a fork in the road. Uncertain which branch off to take, she brought the roadster to a halt. The police car pulled up alongside. "What's the matter now?" the marshal called out. "I don't know which way to go." The marshal and his deputies sprang from their automobile and began to examine the tracks in the road. But if a moving van had passed that way, the tire marks had been obliterated by other vehicles. There was no clue to indicate which route the robbers had selected. "They must have taken the right-hand fork," the marshal hazarded. Nancy shook her head doubtfully. "Doesn't the left-hand road lead to Garwin?" The marshal nodded. "Then it strikes me the robbers would have taken that road. It seems reasonable that they would head for a large city where they could dispose of the stolen goods." "Maybe you're right," the marshal admitted reluctantly. "I'll tell you what we'll do," Nancy proposed, as she had an inspiration. "You take the right-hand road, and I'll head for Garwin. And if you should overtake those rascals, what would you do?" the marshal demanded in some amusement. "You couldn't expect to stop them single-handed." "I wouldn't try. I race back and give the alarm. Hurry. Every minute that we delay gives them just that greater advantage." Without warning, without waiting until the marshal had returned to his automobile, Nancy drew back her car and headed down the left-hand road. The highway was smooth, and as there was a clear stretch ahead, she drove rapidly. She realized that already the robbers had a big start, and that if once they reached Garwood, she could not hope to overtake them. "I'm sure I'm on the right trail," she told herself. "That other road doesn't lead anywhere in particular." After she had traveled several miles, Nancy became less confident. Although she had passed a number of side roads, she had kept to the main highway, and she realized that it would have been easy for the moving van to elude pursuit by taking any one of the branches. "Still, the robbers can't know that they're being followed," she reasoned. "It's likely they'll be off their guard." 15 minutes passed, and Nancy began to fear that after all she had selected the wrong road at the fork. Presently, as she noticed a man with a team of horses approaching, she determined to question him. "Have you seen a large moving van on this road?" she called out as she stopped the roadster along the side wagon. "A truck passed me about 20 minutes ago," the farmer told her. "The big road hog tried to push me into a ditch." Highly elated at the information, Nancy thanked the farmer and drove on. "At the rate I'm going, I should overtake the robbers in a few minutes," she thought. "Oh, if only I could get my hands on the Crowley clock before the police confiscate the stolen goods." 10 minutes passed, and then another 10. As Nancy gazed anxiously down the road, she could see no sign of the moving van. "I've missed them somewhere," she decided in disappointment. "With nothing to do but go back." Nancy Drew recalled the fact that she had passed a roadhouse less than a mile back, and it occurred to her that possibly the robbers had stopped there. "I'll go back there and make inquiry," she thought. "I haven't gone by a single crossroads since I talked with that farmer. So if the robbers didn't stop at the roadhouse, I can't imagine what became of them. If they were on this road, I am certain I would have passed them by this time." Dusk was approaching, and Nancy Drew knew that if she were ever to find the robbers, it must be within the next hour. Skillfully, she turned the roadster around in the road. A few minutes of fast driving brought her within sight of the roadhouse. The place was of disreputable appearance, and Nancy suspected that it might be a bad resort to visit. It stood back from the road a short distance, and was half hidden by tall trees. The building was large and rambling, but rather old and sadly in need of paint. A sign on the gate read, "The Black Horse." Beyond the inn, Nancy caught a glimpse of a garage and a large stable. She did not enter the private driveway which led to the inn, but stopped her car at the side of the road. Before starting to walk toward the roadhouse, she hesitated. I don't like to go in there, but there's no other way, she decided. She walked briskly up the path, glancing about in all directions for a sign of a moving van. The door of the garage was closed, as was the door of the barn, and the thought occurred to her that perhaps the robbers had parked their van inside one of the buildings. As she drew near the inn, Nancy approached cautiously. As she stepped upon the veranda, coarse laughter reached her ears. She tiptoed to a window and peered inside. What she saw caused her to start in surprise. In a dingy, dimly lit room, three men were seated about a table, obviously engaged in a drinking orgy. They were the three men who had robbed the Thompson bungalow. On chapter 19, a risky undertaking. I must notify the marshal at once, Nancy Drew told herself as she recognized the three robbers. Turning away from the window, she crept noiselessly from the porch, and as soon as she was a safe distance from the inn, broke into a run. As she stepped into her roadster, a sudden thought occurred to her. Those robbers must have parked their van in the garage back of the inn. If only I could get my hands on the clock before I notify the police. Once the marshal takes charge of the stolen goods, I'll have no opportunity. Motivated by the impulse, Nancy drove on down the road a short distance, and rounding a bend came up on another side road which led into the woods directly behind the inn. Stopping the roadster where it would be hidden by the trees, she got out and hurried through the timber. Before leaving the car, she had secured her flashlight, for already it was growing dark. Cautiously, she approached the inn from the rear. Reaching the garage, she found the doors closed, but investigation disclosed that they had not been locked. She opened one of the doors and looked inside. There was no sign of a truck, only a battered old Ford car. They must have parked the van in the barn, she decided. As she opened the stable door, it squeaked in an alarming fashion. Anxiously, she glanced toward the inn, but so far as she could tell, her actions were unobserved. There was no one in sight. Flinging the door wide, the girl peered hopefully into the dark interior. A low cry escaped from her lips. There, in front of her, stood the moving van. "What a piece of luck!" she exclaimed, as she viewed the truck with which the robbers had left in the barn. "Now, if I can only find the clock." With a last cautious glance in the direction of the roadhouse, she hastily closed the barn door, lest it swing in the wind and attract attention. With the door shut, the interior of the barn was dark. As Nancy switched on her automobile flashlight and played it over the moving van, she was disappointed to note that it was a covered one. The rear doors were closed. Nevertheless, although she could not see inside, she was certain the truck contained the goods stolen only a few hours before from the Thompson bungalow. Securing a firm grip on the door handle, she gave it a quick turn. To her surprise, the door did not open. As an explanation of disappointment, Nancy turned her flashlight on it, and for the first time noticed the keyhole. The robbers had locked the van. "Oh dear, now what should I do?" she questioned frantically. "I'll never be able to break the lock." Desperately, she glanced about. She dared not remain many minutes in the barn, lest the robbers return and find her there. Yet she could not admit defeat. Perhaps the keys were left in the ignition switch, she thought hopefully. She rushed to the front of the van and clambered into the driver's seat. An examination of the dashboard did not reveal the keys hanging from the ignition switch. The robbers must have taken the keys with them, she told herself. Nancy was discouraged. She was on the point of admitting defeat when a thought came to her. Among her acquaintances there were a number of persons who, upon occasion, hid their automobile keys under the front seat. It was barely possible that the robbers had done likewise. Nancy hastily pulled up the leather seat and looked underneath. A ray of her flashlight illuminated a small object in one corner. Eagerly, she snatched it up and saw that it was a key ring. "Luck was with me once," she murmured as she ran back to the rear of the van. After trying several of the keys, she at last found one which fit the lock. Turning it, she jerked open the door. As she flashed her light about inside the truck, she saw that she had made no mistake. The van contained the stolen goods, and it was loaded nearly to the top. "What shall I do if the clock is on the bottom?" Nancy groaned as another problem occurred to her. "I'll never find it." Dexterously, she swung herself up on the load. She flashed the light about on chairs, tables, rugs, and boxes. There was no sign of the Crowley clock. Then the beam rested for a moment upon an object in a far corner, and with a low cry of delight, Nancy saw that her search had been rewarded. Protected by a blanket, an old-fashioned mantel clock rested on top of a center table in the very front of the van. She scrambled laboriously over odd pieces of furniture as she tried to reach the clock. Her dress caught on something sharp and tore, but Nancy did not heed it. She snatched at the blanket and swept the clock toward her. One glance at the timepiece assured her that it fit the description Abigail Rowan had given her. It had a square face and the top was ornamented with a crescent. Nancy was almost certain that it was the Crowley clock. But as she stood staring at it, her keen ears detected the sound of voices outside the barn. The robbers were coming back. I'm lost, flashed through her mind. Clutching the blanket and the clock tightly in her arms, Nancy Drew partly crawled and partly fell over objects as she struggled to get out of the truck before it was too late. She was afraid to think what would happen to her if the robbers discovered her in the van. Reaching the door, she leaped lightly to the floor. She could now hear heavy footsteps coming closer and closer. Nancy slammed the truck doors shut and searched wildly for the keys. Oh, what did I do with them? She thought frantically. She saw that they had fallen from the door to the floor and snatched them up. Hurriedly inserting the right key in the lock, she secured the doors. The deed was not accomplished a minute too soon. As Nancy wheeled about, she distinctly heard the murmur of angry voices outside. The robbers were quarreling amongst themselves, and already someone was working at the fastening of the barn door. Escape was cut off. Nancy felt that she was cornered. Oh, what shall I do? She thought in despair. In chapter 20, What Nancy Found. While Nancy Drew hesitated, uncertain which way to turn, her mind worked more clearly than ever before. She realized instantly that she could not hope to run to the front of the car and place the keys under the seat where she had found them. Instead of attempting the impossible, she flung them upon the floor. Then, glancing frantically about for a hiding place, she saw an empty manger. Running to it, she scrambled inside and dropped the blanket over her head just as one of the barn doors swung open. 3 men came in, closing the door after them. And, as Nancy had suspected, they were the robbers. Evidently, they had been drinking, for they were quarreling among themselves over the division of spoils. "Oh, shut up!" the leader growled. "Get in and let's be getting out of here before we have the cops down on our heads." Nancy heard him rummaging under the seat of the car. "Say, what did you do with them keys?" he demanded harshly of one of his men. "What do you suppose?" came the unpleasant response. "I put them under the seat." "Then come and find them, and don't be all day about it, either." "All right. Get out of the way and give me a chance." As the second robber went to the truck and began a careful search for the keys, Nancy Drew crouched fearfully in her hiding place. "I don't see what could have happened to them keys," the robber complained after an unsuccessful search. "I put 'em right under the seat." "Say, if you lost them—" The leader did not finish the threat, for at that moment the third robber stooped over and picked up something at his feet. "Here they are, on the floor. You must have put 'em in your pocket and dropped them out." "I didn't," the other retorted. "I never had them keys in my pocket." The robbers were in a quarrelsome mood, and would have engaged in a battle then and there had not the leader interposed. "Say, cut out the comedy. We ain't got no time for a fight unless we want to land behind the bars. And if we do, it'll be your fault. You left that girl to starve." "Shut up," the leader snarled. He rattled the rear door of the van and found it locked. "There's no harm done this time. No one has meddled with the truck. Now get in before I give you a swift kick." After a few more angry words, the 3 robbers climbed into the front seat and started the engine. Due to their inebriated condition, they had overlooked the barn doors, and before the van could be backed from the building, it was necessary for one of the men to get out and fasten them back. In relief, Nancy watched the men go. The moment they were a safe distance from the barn, she scrambled out of the manger. She paused long enough to make certain that the van had taken the road to Garwin. Then, clutching the precious clock in her arms, she turned and ran. As Nancy darted into the woods, she cast an anxious glance over her shoulder, but to her intense relief she saw that she was not being followed. There was no one to be seen in the vicinity of the roadhouse, and the big moving van was proceeding slowly on its way toward Garwin, the occupants oblivious that their whereabouts had been discovered. "I had a narrow escape that time," Nancy told herself as she ran. "I hate to think of my fate if I had been discovered." She chuckled softly at her own bravado and clutched the mantel clock more tightly in her arms. Oh well, it was worth the risk I took. It was dark in the woods, and Nancy could see only a few feet ahead of her. To her chagrin, she discovered that she had left her automobile flashlight somewhere in the barn, probably in the manger. There was no time to go back after it. Confident that her sense of direction was good, she plunged through the bushes toward the place where she had parked her roadster. I'm sure the clock is the right one, she thought. Now, if it only contains Jocelyn Crowley's notebook. In the timber, there was insufficient light for her to examine the clock, but from the hasty glance she had given it in the barn, she was almost certain it was the timepiece Abigail Rowan had described to her. If the old woman's story was correct, she would find Joshua Crowley's notebook inside. Reaching the roadster and finding it exactly as she had left it, the girl sprang inside. I'll go for the police as fast as I can and send them after the robbers, she decided. The Tompkins don't deserve any consideration, but I couldn't be mean enough to sit quietly by and let them lose their household goods. Then, as she was about to start the motor, her glance fell upon the Crowley clock, which she had placed on the seat beside her. She was fairly overcome with curiosity to learn what it would reveal. As she hesitated, she found it impossible to resist the temptation of investigating it immediately, even at the cost of a few minutes' delay. Impulsively, she opened the glass door and ran her hand around the walls. There was nothing inside. Gone, Nancy groaned. Could it be that the Tompkins had discovered the notebook only to destroy it? Nancy discarded the thought as quickly as it came to mind, for she recalled the conversation she had overheard between Ada and Isabel. No, they were as ignorant as herself concerning the location of the will. It was more likely that Abigail Rowan had been confused in her story. After all, she had not declared that the notebook would be found inside the clock. Nancy had made the deduction herself. I was almost certain I'd find the notebook, she murmured in disappointment. It must be here somewhere. Turning the clock upside down, she gave it a hard shake. Something rattled. Hopefully, she repeated the action. Hopefully, she repeated the action. Unquestionably, there was something bulky inside. It must be a notebook, Nancy thought in excitement. Unless I'm wrong, it's behind the face. How can I get it off? After a vain attempt to remove the heavy cardboard face with her fingers, she lifted the automobile seat and found a small tool with which she could pry. It then required but an instant remove the two hands of the clock and jerk off the face. As the cardboard fell to the floor, Nancy peered hopefully inside and gave a low cry of delight. Eureka! There, at one side of the clock, attached to a hook in the top, dangled a tiny blue notebook. Chapter 21. Capturing the Robbers. Eagerly, Nancy drew toward the little notebook from the hook. The light was dim, but by holding the book directly under the dashlight, she could make out the words on the cover. The property of Joshua Crowley. I found it at last, she cried. Quickly turning the first few pages, she saw that they were yellowed with age. The writing was fine and cramped, and the ink had faded. These pages were crowded with business notations, but in the poor light it was next to impossible to make out the words. Nancy was excited, for she was positive that the notebook would disclose what Joshua Crowley had done with his will. Yet she realized that she could not hope to read through the book without a considerable loss of precious time. If she were to report the whereabouts of the robbers to the police, she must not delay another instant. I'll read the notebook later, she decided. Hurriedly replacing it on the hook inside the clock, she tacked on the face again. Then dropping the timepiece on the seat beside her, she covered it with a blanket. Starting the engine, she skillfully backed the roadster and headed for the main road. Reaching the highway, she cast an anxious glance in the direction the robbers had taken. There was no sign of a light on the road. The moving van had disappeared. I must travel some now, Nancy told herself grimly. Those robbers have at least 10 minutes start, and I may have trouble finding the marshal and his deputies. Bending low over the steering wheel, she deliberately stepped hard on the accelerator. The roadster leaped forward as though it, too, comprehended the need for haste. If those men reach Garwin before the marshal overtakes them, there won't be one chance in 100 of capturing them, Nancy thought. It was foolish of me to take time to look at the clock. Presently, reaching the fork in the road, she selected the right-hand turn, and with undiminished speed rushed on. She had gone several miles beyond the fork when far ahead she caught sight of an automobile headlight. Nancy promptly reduced the speed of the car. The marshal and his deputies may have given up the search and are coming back, she reasoned. Must be careful not to pass them. As the automobile approached, Nancy slowed her roadster practically to a standstill. Then, as she recognized the police car, she brought her own automobile to a halt. As the marshal and his deputies flashed by, she cried out for them to stop. There was a loud screeching of brakes as the police car came to an abrupt halt. Springing from the roadster, Nancy ran forward. Quick, she called to the marshal. The robbers have taken the road to Garwin. If you hurry, you can overtake them. Go on, and I'll follow. Without waiting for more, the marshal and his deputies drove off at top speed. The automobile rounded a bend and was lost to view. For an instant, Nancy Drew stood looking after it. Then, springing into her roadster, she too was off. Following close behind the police car, the girl sped down the road in pursuit of the robbers. The two automobiles passed the roadhouse beyond the fork and raced toward Garland. We should have overtaken the robbers by this time, Nancy told herself anxiously, after a number of miles had been traversed, and still there was no sight of a moving van. They can't have gone very far. 10 minutes passed, then unexpectedly she caught a glimpse of a red tail light on the road far ahead. It must be the van, Nancy thought. The light doesn't appear to be moving fast enough for an automobile. Evidently, the marshal and his deputies were of the same opinion, for at that moment the police car slowed down. Don't fire unless it's necessary, the marshal ordered his men. But if they resist, pepper them. Cautiously, the police car approached. As the headlight played upon the rear of the van, Nancy saw the license plate clearly and recognized the numbers. Then, as the van pulled over to the side of the road, the police car drove alongside. Halt! Came the order. The van did not stop. Instead, it put on additional speed and crowded the police car towards a ditch. Nancy's heart was in her mouth as she watched, for it seemed certain that the marshal and his deputies were doomed. At the very edge of the road, the police car, by a sudden spurt of speed, forged ahead and averted disaster. Halt! Rang out the warning cry a second time. Halt, or we'll fire! There was a sharp crack of a revolver as the robbers fired the first shot. The marshal and his deputies answered with a quick volley. One of the shots found its mark, the front tire. The van swerved in the road, and as the two side wheels went off into a steep ditch, toppled over. In an instant, the marshal and his men were out of the police car and had covered the three robbers. So easily had the van tipped on its side that the men were not injured, but the unexpected jar had thrown them off their guard. Take their guns, the marshal ordered. A deputy relieved the three men of their revolvers and searched their pockets for other dangerous weapons. Another deputy handcuffed them. By this time, Nancy, who had stopped her roadster at the side of the road, reached the scene. As she came running up, the marshal turned to her. Can you identify these men? As a light was flashed upon each of the robbers in turn, Nancy nodded. There is the man who locked me up and left me to starve, she declared, pointing to the leader of the robber band. And the stolen goods are in the van? They'll get 10 or 20 years for this, the marshal promised. We'll hold them on several charges. You are willing to testify against them, I suppose. Yes, if it is necessary, Nancy promised reluctantly. But I don't live in this county, and I'm anxious to get home right away. It seems to me you have enough evidence to convict them. Well, if you don't want to, I guess there's no need for you to go back with us, the marshal admitted. I'll take your address, and if your testimony should be required later, I'll get in touch with you. As Nancy told the marshal her name and address, he glanced at her with new interest. So you're the daughter of Carson Drew. I see you're following in his footsteps, starting in young, aren't you? Nancy laughed. It was only an accident that took me to the Thompson bungalow at the critical moment. She protested modestly. I don't deserve any credit for the roundup. Not many girls would have used their brains the way you did, the marshal observed. Unless I'm mistaken, these robbers are old hands at the game. They've been plying their trade around Moon Lake for a number of seasons. The residents will be mighty grateful for what you've done, and that Miss Thompson you spoke of, she ought to give you a liberal reward for saving her household goods. Nancy shook her head. I don't want a reward. Just the same, you've earned one, the marshal insisted. If you're shy about blowing your own horn, I'll take up with this Miss Thompson myself. You don't know her as well as I do, Nancy remarked. She'll not offer a reward, and even if she did, I wouldn't accept it. In fact, I must ask you not to mention my name to her at all. You don't want any credit for capturing the robbers? The marshal gasped in astonishment. No. I prefer that my name not be mentioned in connection with the affair. I have a particular reason for making the request. Well, you're a queer one, the marshal remarked. You're the first person I ever saw who didn't want to take all the glory that was coming to him. Not, you'll not mention my name? No, I'll keep it mum, the marshal promised. And if you're anxious not to figure in the case, I guess we can get along without your testimony. He turned toward the moving van. I'll just have a look inside and see if everything is here. Taking the keys, which one of the deputies had turned over to him, the marshal unlocked the rear doors of the van and carefully glanced inside. It's all here, he announced. Nancy smiled and thought of a clock, which at the moment was hidden under a blanket in a roadster less than a dozen yards away. Let's be getting away from here, the marshal directed briskly. He signaled out one of the deputies. You stay here and guard the stolen goods until we can send another truck after it. I'll see to it that these robbers land behind bars, and then I'll come back. Just a minute, Nancy interposed as the marshal was about to escort the three robbers to the police car. I want to ask a few questions. She turned to the leader of the robbers. It was you who stole the keys from Jeff Tucker after getting him drunk, wasn't it? What if I did? The robber growled. I wish I'd finished him. Unceremoniously, the three prisoners were crowded into the police car. One of the deputies took the steering wheel, and another stood on the running board, covering the robbers with his revolver. There was no room left for the marshal. Are you going back through town? He asked Nancy. Yes, it's right on my way to River Heights, she responded, without a thought as to the purpose of the question. And if you don't mind, I'll ride back with you. There isn't room in the police car. Why, of course, Nancy stammered. At once she thought of a clock which she had left on the seat of the roadster. What if the marshal should discover it? Even as the thought came to her, the marshal started toward the roadster. Chapter 22. What the Notebook Revealed. Just a minute, Nancy Drew stammered as she darted toward the roadster, blocking the marshal's path. There's a package in the seat. I'll put it in the back. Hastily, she picked up the clock, which was covered with a blanket. Never mind that, the marshal interposed. I can hold it. Oh, it's no trouble to put it in the catch-all at the back, Nancy assured him. Then we'll be out of your way. Before the man could offer to do it for her, she had carried the clock to the rear of the car. Lifting the cover, she placed it on the floor. During the ride back to town, Nancy Drew was anything but easy in her mind, but she gave no indication that she was nervous. It was not until she had said goodbye to the marshal at the jail that she felt entirely safe. That was a narrow escape, she laughed as she drove away. It might not have gone so well with me if the marshal had discovered stolen goods in my car. It certainly wouldn't have been easy to explain how I came by that clock. Although it was late, Nancy was determined to return to River Heights that night. She was anxious to examine the notebook and learn whether or not it would disclose the hiding place of Jocelyn Crowley's second will. Oh, I'm so eager to get home and have a chance to dig into the notebook, she thought as she drove along the road. I went through a lot to get it, and I'll be disappointed if it doesn't contain good news. It will mean so much to the Horner girls and poor old Abigail if the will is found. It was nearly 10 o'clock that night when Nancy, tired and worn from the long automobile ride, reached her home in River Heights. As she drove into the double garage, she noticed that her father's car was gone. A glance at the house disclosed that the windows were dark. I wonder where father can be, she questioned herself. I wanted to tell him about my discovery right away. She removed the Crowley clock from the back of the roadster and paused an instant to gloat over it. She was well satisfied with the result of her detective work. Locking the garage door, she went inside and switched on the electric light. The house seemed deserted, for Hannah, the maid, was already retired. Father's probably working late at the office, Nancy decided. Oh well, I may as well stay up, and while I'm waiting, I'll have a look at the notebook. During the long ride from Moon Lake, she had been impatient for an opportunity to examine the Crowley notebook, and now she lost no time in finding a screwdriver. She took off the face of the clock, and from the hook removed the notebook. Now to find out what became of the will, she declared, as she curled up in a comfortable chair near a reading lamp. Oh, I hope everything turns out right for Allie and Grace and for Abigail Rowan. Carefully, Nancy thumbed over the pages, for they were yellowed with age and she was afraid they might tear. Evidently, Jocelyn Crowley had used the same notebook for many years. Page after page the girl read, perusing inconsequential memoranda, and numerous notations of property owned by Joshua Crowley, as well as various business transactions made by him. Nancy was surprised at the list of stocks, bonds, and notes, which apparently belonged to the estate. The amount reached well over $300. I had no idea Joshua Crowley had that much money, she murmured. After a time, she grew impatient of the seemingly endless list, and skipping many pages, turned ahead. Suddenly, the phrase, "my will," caught and held her attention. Eagerly, Nancy pounced upon it and began to read. I found it at last, she told herself in excitement. The notation was brief and written in Joshua Crowley's cramped hand. To whom it may concern, my last will and testament will be found in safety deposit box number 148 in the Masonville National Bank. The box is under the name of Joshua Harkston. The date of this entry was recent, and the ink had not faded as in the earlier entries in the notebook. Then there was another will, Nancy exclaimed aloud. Oh, I'm sure it must be in favor of the Horner girls, too. She hurriedly read on, but although she carefully examined every page in the book, there was no other mention of the will. No wonder the will never came to light, Nancy mused. Who would have ever thought of looking for it in a safety deposit box under the name of Joshua Harkston? In his zest for safety, Joshua Crowley nearly defeated his own purpose. Her thoughts were interrupted as she heard an automobile turning in at the drive. Rushing to the window, Nancy saw her father drive into the garage. As he opened the front door, she ran to meet him. Well, hello, Nancy, he greeted her in surprise. If I had known you were here, I have come home sooner. I was doing some special work on a case. Back from Moon Lake early, aren't you? Yes, Nancy admitted, trying to hide her excitement, but for a good reason. Before her father could remove his hat, she plunged into the story of her adventures and ended by showing him the notebook which she had found inside the mantel clock. When she had finished, Carson Drew stared at her with mingled pride and amusement. You're a regular detective, Nancy. You're making fun of me. Carson Drew's face sobered. No, I'm proud of what you've done, Nancy. I couldn't have done better myself. Perhaps not so well. You took a real risk when you encountered those robbers, but so long as you are back home safe and sound, it doesn't matter. The Tompkins aren't going to thank me when they found out what I've done. Hardly. They may accuse you of stealing their clock, although so long as their house was open when you entered, they can't claim that you broke in. However, if we can manage to keep the knowledge from them, it will be just as well that they don't learn the details of how the will was found. Carson Drew picked up the notebook and glanced through it with interest. The fortune will make a nice nest egg for someone, he commented, as he looked over the list of stocks and bonds owned by Crowley. These securities are of the best, too, all gilt edge. I hope the Tompkins will be cut off without a cent, Nancy declared. It's likely they will be, but of course you never can be certain until the will is read. Unless I am mistaken, your discovery will strike the Tompkins at an especially awkward time. What do you mean? Well, there's a rumor going the rounds to the effect that Richard Thompson has been losing heavily in the stock market this last month. He has been getting credit at a number of banks on the strength of the inheritance, and I suspect he is depending on Crowley's money to pull him through a tight place. At least he has made every effort to speed up the settlement of the estate. It would serve the Thompsons right if they lose everything, Nancy said decisively. They never had a particle of charity for anyone. They would let their relatives starve before they would help them. Carson Drew glanced again at the notebook in his hand. Now that you have found this, the thing to do is locate the will at once before Richard Thompson gets wind of what is up, he advised. We want to administer the coup de grace before the Thompsons had a chance to get the fortune into their hands. Once the estate is settled, it will not be easy to wrest it away from them. I'd like to turn the matter over to you, Nancy responded promptly. I'm not familiar with legal procedure, and you know exactly what should be done. I'll be glad to help you if I can, Nancy. The first thing, of course, is to get our hands on the will. It should be easy. We could drive over to Masonville National Bank the first thing in the morning. Yes, but we haven't the authority to open the safety deposit box. It may be necessary to get a court order. Carson Drew reminded his daughter. That's so. I hadn't thought of that, but you can manage it, can't you? Drew chuckled. Well, I know the judge. Yes, I think I can arrange it all right. I'll tell him I'm acting as counsel for the Horner girls. I really am, because I promised I'd help them if I could. I'm sure everything is going to turn out just as I hoped, Nancy cried enthusiastically. The deserving relatives will get the money, and the Tompkins will be left out in the cold. Abigail Rowan will be able to have the medical attention she needs, and Allie and Grace will be fixed for life. Don't build your hopes too high, Carson Drew advised her wisely. There may be a slip, you know. We may fail to find the will in the deposit box, and of course, there's a chance that Joshua Crowley didn't dispose of the fortune a as it was expected that he would. If I were you, I wouldn't say anything to the Horner girls until we are certain. I won't, Nancy promised, as she turned toward the stairs, but I can't help hoping. I'm going to bed now and get a good night's rest, and tomorrow we'll start off on the big adventure. Oh, I can scarcely wait to find out what the will contains. Halfway up the stairs, she hesitated, and then returned to the living room and picked up the notebook, which rested on the table. After all I've gone through to get my hands on this, I'm not going to take any chances, she laughed. Tonight, I'm going to sleep with it under my pillow. On chapter 23, Looking for the Will. When Nancy Drew awoke the following morning, the bright sunlight was streaming in at her open bedroom window. As her eyes turned toward the little clock on her dresser, she was alarmed to see that it was after 9 o'clock. How could I oversleep on a morning like this? She asked herself. Quickly running her hand under the pillow, she brought out the Crowley notebook and surveyed it with satisfaction. Oh, what a surprise the Tompkins are going to get! She chuckled softly. Hastily dressing, Nancy hurried downstairs. She found out her father had already left for the office. Oh dear, she thought. I wonder if he forgot. At that moment, Hannah appeared from the kitchen, bearing a plate of crisp, steaming waffles. Your father said I was to tell you to go to his office just as soon as you finish your breakfast, she informed Nancy. He said you were to bring your notebook. My notebook? Oh, yes, I know what he meant. It won't take long to eat breakfast, she predicted as she seated herself at the table. After a hasty meal, she climbed into the roadster and drove to her father's office. She found him alone in the inner office. I'm sorry I overslept this morning, Nancy apologized. Have I kept you waiting? Not at all, her father assured her pleasantly. I told Hannah not to awaken you because I knew you needed rest after your hard day yesterday. And anyway, we couldn't do anything about the will without an order from the court. Did you get it? Yes. I saw the judge early this morning. After explaining everything to him, he gave me the paper. I have it here. Carson Drew tapped an inside pocket. I brought the notebook with me. You wanted it, didn't you? Yes. I thought it might be necessary to show it to the judge, but we won't need it now. However, it may be well to put it in the safe. I'll do it now. Carson Drew took the notebook from Nancy and, after placing it inside a small safe, closed and locked the door. When shall we start for Masonville? Nancy asked somewhat impatiently. Right now, if you're ready. After leaving a number of instructions with his private secretary, Carson Drew followed his daughter from the office. He took his place beside her in the roadster. I'll never get over it if we don't find the will, she declared as they drove along. A flush of excitement had tinted her cheeks, and her eyes were bright. You must remember one thing, Nancy, returned her father calmly. Crowley was a queer character and did things in a queer way. So the will may be there, and again it may not be. Perhaps he left only further directions in a box. I remember one case in Canada many years ago. An eccentric Frenchman died, and he left directions to look in a trunk of old clothes. In the pocket of a coat were found further directions to look in a closet of his home. There his family found directions to look in a copper boiler. The boiler had disappeared and was finally located in a curiosity shop. Inside, on the bottom, was pasted what proved to be a word puzzle. The old Frenchman's heirs were about to give up in despair when a puzzler solved the puzzle, and the man's bag of gold was found under a board in his bedroom. Oh, but they found it anyway, breathed Nancy. The trip to Masonville was quickly accomplished, and in a short time Nancy stopped the roadster in front of the Masonville National Bank. You may as well come, too, Carson Drew said, as Nancy hesitated. Parking the car at the curbing, the two entered the bank. Mr. Drew offered his professional card and asked to see the president. After a few minutes' wait, they were ushered into a private conference room. An elderly man arose to greet them. The introductions accomplished, Mr. Drew hastened to state his mission. Before he could finish the story, the bank president cut him short. I am afraid you have come to the wrong place. To my knowledge, we have never had dealings with a man by the name of Joshua Crowley. Perhaps you did not know him by that name. I believe he had a deposit box here under the name of Joshua Harkston. Joshua Harkston, the bank repeated thoughtfully. It seems to me we have been trying to get in touch with a man by that name. If I remember correctly, the rent on his safety deposit box has not been paid for some time. If you will wait a moment, I will find out. The banker left the room. He returned in a few minutes with a sheet of paper in his hand. According to our record, a Joshua Harkston rented box 148 from us, but the past year the rent has not been paid. Here is his signature if you care to look at it. Eagerly, Nancy and her father examined the sheet of paper which the banker handed them. At a glance, they saw that the writing was the cramped hand of Joshua Crowley. It may be that Crowley and Harkston were the same person, as you say, the banker continued. We have no authority to permit you to examine the contents of the safety deposit box. I have an order from the court, Mr. Drew said quietly. Oh, that is different. The banker's attitude underwent a sudden change. May I see the document, please? Certainly. Mr. Drew removed the paper from his pocket and handed it to the banker. After examining it for a minute, the president returned. You find it satisfactory? Mr. Drew asked. Perfectly. You're welcome to open the safety deposit box. Of course, in the presence of a bank official. I suppose you have the key? Nancy's face fell. She had never once thought of the key. We have no key, Mr. Drew admitted. Isn't there one in the bank which will fit the box? He knew some small banks had this. No, we did away with that when we got a regular vault, said the banker. But wait a minute, he added suddenly. I think I can help you out. He disappeared into another part of the bank and presently came back holding up a sealed envelope. That man had two keys for his box, and he left one here in my possession, sealed up as you can see. As you have a court order, I feel you're entitled to this key. And he handed the envelope to Mr. Drew. The envelope was marked with Joshua Crowley's assumed name, also the number of his box. It contained a small, flat key, nothing more. Now we will go to the boxes, said the bank official. Nancy and her father followed the president into the main part of the bank. They were then admitted into a small room which was protected by heavily barred doors. Finally, they entered the vault which contained the safety deposit boxes. The president inserted a small key in a lock, then used the key given to Mr. Drew, and finally pulled out a metal box which bore the number 148. Politely, he handed the box to Mr. Drew, who quickly lifted the lid and peered inside. Unable to resist the temptation, Nancy peeped over her father's shoulder. The box was empty, save for one document in the bottom. Oh, it must be the will, Nancy cried before Mr. Drew could examine the paper. It is the will, her father announced after a hasty glance at the document. A will, eh? Said the bank official with keen interest. Yes, and I will ask you to do me a favor. Kindly place your initials on each page so you can later on identify it if necessary, and I will do the same. Certainly, Mr. Drew. I've done that before. Mr. Drew thanked the president for the help he had given, and with Nancy left the bank. Once they had gained the comparative privacy of the roadster, they grinned at each other like two mischievous youngsters. Well, we put it over, eh, Nancy? We certainly did. But read the will. I'm dying to find out what it says. I can't stand the suspense another minute. The will comprised several pages, all written in Joshua Crowley's cramped style. Mr. Drew spread the pages out before him, and Nancy pored over them. Not only was the fine writing difficult to make out, but the legal terms were confusing. It's going to be a terrible task to study it all out, Nancy complained. Yes, I think we had better take it to the office, Mr. Drew suggested. He picked up the last page of the will and studied it closely. I see Dr. Nesbit signed as a witness. No wonder the will never came to light. If you remember, he died a few days after Crowley. Thomas Wackley, the other witness, I never heard of. Oh, I don't care who witnessed the will, Nancy said impatiently. I want to find out if Allie and Grace and poor Abigail got anything. I can't make head nor tail out of it. I see their names are mentioned, Mr. Drew told her, pointing to one of the pages. Oh, I'm so glad. So long as I know they're taken care of, I suppose I can wait until we get to your office to find out the details. We can have the will copied in typewriting. Yes, I want to go over the document carefully. It is evident that Crowley drew it up himself, and I want to make certain it is legal. Or do you think there is any danger it won't be? Nancy questioned anxiously. I can't tell until I go over it in detail, Nancy. But from a hasty examination, it appears that the Thompsons aren't mentioned, and they are certain to make trouble if they can. I want to make sure there is no way for them to break the will before I notify them we have it in our possession. Mr. Drew folded the papers and placed them carefully in his pocket. As Nancy started the motor in preparation for the return trip to River Heights, she began to chuckle. If the will does prove to be legal, it won't be a blow. It won't be a blow for the Tompkins. I'd give a lot to see how they take it. I think it would be a splendid idea to call a meeting of all the relatives and read the will aloud. I'm afraid you have a dark motive behind that idea, Mr. Drew laughed. But I'll try to humor you this time. What's more, I'll promise that you may be present when the coup de grace is administered for the Tompkins. Chapter 24. The coup de grace. Oh, Father, it's nearly 2 o'clock now. The relatives should be coming in a few minutes. I'm so excited. Carson Drew, who stood in the living room of the Drew home, smiled indulgently at his daughter as she fluttered about arranging chairs. I believe you're more thrilled than if you were inheriting the fortune yourself, he remarked. I am thrilled, Nancy admitted. I can scarcely wait until the will is read aloud. Won't everyone be surprised? Especially the Tompkins. Do you think they will come? Oh, yes, the Tompkins will be here. And unless I am mistaken, they will bring a lawyer with them. Just as soon as they learned that another will had come to light, they began to worry. Are you certain the will can't be broken? Nancy inquired anxiously. Of course, I can't be certain, Nancy, but I've gone over it carefully, and so far as I can tell, it is technically perfect. Joshua Crowley was peculiar in some ways, but he was no one's fool. I'll promise you the Tompkins will have a difficult time of it if they try to break the will. After locating the Crowley will in a safe deposit box at the Masonville National Bank in the town of Masonville, Carson Drew and his daughter had read it carefully. Without disclosing the contents to anyone, they had called a special meeting of the relatives at the Drew home. With the exception of Abigail Rowan, who was confined to her bed, all had promised to be present. Grace and Allie Horner, although not relatives, had also been invited to attend the meeting. It's too bad Abigail Rowan can't come, said Nancy, but we'll get the news to her fast enough. It will probably be a great surprise all around, said her father, with a little smile. Nancy, you have done a remarkable piece of work. Oh, I can hardly wait to have it all cleared up, cried the happy girl. We may have some hard minutes with the Tompkins, Nancy. Yes, I suppose so. I suppose anybody would be sorry to see a fortune slipping away. Well, we'll see what happens, returned the lawyer. The Horner girls are coming up the walk now, Nancy announced, glancing out the window. I'm dying to tell them the news, but I'll wait. She greeted Allie and Grace cordially and escorted them to comfortable chairs in the living room. Is it true the will has been found? Allie whispered. You and Grace have no cause to worry, Nancy assured her with a mysterious smile. No sooner had she seated the Horner sisters, the doorbell rang again. This time she admitted Edna and Matilda Turner, who were dressed in their best black silk gowns. A few minutes later, the Matthew brothers, William and Fred, arrived. I guess everyone is here now except the Tompkins, Carson Drew commented. We had better wait for them a few minutes. There's no need to wait, for at that moment the doorbell jangled sharply. Nancy opened the door, and the four members of the Thompson family sailed grandly in. As Carson Drew had predicted, they were accompanied by a lawyer. Why have we been called here? Miss Thompson demanded, addressing Mr. Drew. Have you the audacity to claim that another will has been found? I have the will here, Miss Thompson, Carson Drew replied politely. It's preposterous, Miss Thompson stormed. Joshua Crowley made only one will, and in that he left everything to us. It looks like a conspiracy to me, added tartly, as she gazed coldly upon the relatives who were seated about the room. Isabel did not speak, but tossed her head contemptuously. Richard Thompson likewise did not offer a comment, but uneasily seated himself beside the lawyer who had accompanied him. If you would kindly be seated, Miss Thompson, we will read the will, Mr. Drew suggested. Reluctantly, Miss Thompson obeyed. As you have probably learned by this time, Mr. Drew began, a second will of the late Joshua Crowley has been found in a safety deposit box in a Masonville bank. The will is unusually long, and with your permission, I would read only the portions which have to do with the disposal of the property. Mr. Drew picked up several sheets of typewriting from the table, and after a moment's hesitation, began to read in a clear voice. I, Joshua Crowley, do make this my last will and testament, hereby revoking all former wills by me at any time made. I give and bequeath all my property, real and personal, as follows. To my beloved friends and neighbors, Allie and Grace Horner, the sum of $75,000 each. Oh, I can't believe it, Allie gasped. Neither can I, Miss Thompson snapped. $150,000 when they aren't even relatives? Why, that's nearly half of the estate. The will is a fraud. There is no mistake, Mr. Drew told her quietly. Again he picked up the will and began to read. To Abigail Rowan, in consideration of her kindness to me, the sum of $75,000. Oh, I'm so glad, Grace murmured. Now she'll be able to get the medical attention she needs, Allie added. I wish she could have been here, Nancy said quietly, but I'll see to it that she is notified before the day is over. That old lady gets $75,000, Ada Thompson demanded harshly. What did she ever do for the Crowley? Angrily, she turned to her mother. We kept him for years, and this is the pay we get? To my nephews, Fred and William Matthews, the sum of $20,000 each, Mr. Drew read. We didn't expect that much, the Matthew brothers declared in genuine surprise. To my cousins Edna and Matilda Turner, the sum of $20,000 each. Oh, how generous, Edna murmured. Aren't we mentioned at all? Miss Thompson broke in sharply. Mr. Drew smiled. Yes, you are mentioned, but perhaps in not the way you anticipate. I'm coming to that now. To Grace and Allie Horner, my household furniture now in the possession of Miss Richard Thompson. There was a gasp of surprise from everyone in the room, and Miss Thompson half rose from her chair. It was generally known about River Heights that the Thompsons had practically confiscated Joshua Crowley's furniture at the time they induced him to make his home with them. How insulting! Miss Thompson cried. Does Joshua Crowley dare hint that I took his furniture? I'm sure I don't know what was in his mind at the time he wrote the will, Carson Drew told her with a smile. Oh, we have enough without the furniture, Grace interposed quickly. Haven't we, Ellie? Ellie nodded. We'll not take the household goods from you, Miss Thompson. Carson Drew carefully folded Carson Drew carefully folded the document he had been reading, and after placing it in a drawer, turned to the relatives. That is all there is, except that there is a proviso to pay all his just debts, including his funeral expenses, and that what little balance is left, maybe $3,000 or $4,000, goes to the Manningham Old Men's Home. Fortunately, Joshua Crowley kept his assets in a liquid state. It will not be difficult to convert the estate into cash. For that reason, I should think it will be possible to draw on your inheritance is at once. We're actually cut off without a cent? Richard Thompson asked in disbelief. His face was unusually white. I'm afraid you are, Mr. Drew replied. But it can't be, Mr. Thompson returned. You don't understand. I must have the money. I can't help you. I did not make the will. It's a conspiracy, Ada cried bitterly. She wheeled upon Nancy, her face convulsed with anger. You had something to do with this, Nancy Drew, she said bitterly. Perhaps I had, Nancy admitted pleasantly. We'll break the will, Miss Thompson announced firmly. Of course you may drag the matter into court if you like, Mr. Drew responded. But I warn you, it will be only a waste of your time and money. If you don't wish to accept my judgment, ask your own lawyer. Mr. Drew is right, the lawyer said promptly without waiting for Miss Thompson to question him. Oh, is he? Is he? Miss Thompson reported. If that's all you know about law, you're discharged. We'll get another lawyer and we'll fight to the last ditch. With that, she rose and stalked grandly from the room. Isabel and Ada followed, after bestowing a withering glance upon Nancy. Mr. Thompson brought up the rear. As soon as the door had closed behind them, the lawyer rose, picked up his briefcase. Well, I can't say I'm sorry to lose the case, he remarked to Mr. Drew, as he, too, took his leave. At once the atmosphere became less strained. Everyone began to talk at once. Oh, Nancy, I can hardly believe it yet, Allie declared happily. The money means so much to Grace and me, and we owe it all to you, Nancy Drew. You haven't told us how you came to find the will, but I know you were responsible. As the Horner girls and Mr. Crowley's relatives begged her for the details, Nancy told of her adventure with the robbers at Moon Lake. When she had finished the story, they praised her highly for what she had done. We'll never be able to thank you enough, Grace said quietly. But after the estate has been settled, we'll try to show our appreciation. It was on the tip of Nancy's tongue to say that she did not want a reward when Mr. Drew turned the conversation into a different channel. The Tompkins will not give up the money without a fight, he said. My advice would be to ask the court to appoint an administrator at once. We all want you, I'm sure, Grace Horner declared quickly. She regarded the others questioningly. Everyone nodded assent. And of course we want you to act as our lawyer, Grace added. I'll be glad to assist you, Mr. Drew promised. If the Tompkins bring the matter into court, I'll give them a battle they'll never forget. After thanking Mr. Drew and Nancy for what they had done, the relatives at last took their departure. Allie and Grace were the last to leave. As they turned to say goodbye to Nancy, Carson Drew opened a closet and took out the Crowley clock. I guess this belongs to you now, he remarked, handing the clock to Allie. It was included in the Crowley's household goods. I don't know what we'll do with it, Allie laughed. Presently, the Horner girls departed with the clock. On the porch, they paused to whisper significantly to Nancy, You'll hear from us again. After everyone had left the house, Mr. Drew turned to his daughter with a smile. Well, we administered the coup de grace to the Tompkins, all right. Yes, it wasn't funny to watch their faces when they learned. Yes, wasn't it funny to watch their faces when they learned they were cut off without a cent? They took it hard. It's my opinion the Tompkins won't be able to hold their heads so high after this. Richard Tompkins looked rather sick when he left. I suspect he's desperately in need of ready cash. The Tompkins deserve to be cut off without a cent, Nancy Drew declared. I'm so glad everything came out right, and that Allie and Grace received the bulk of their fortune. Yes, they were charming girls. Unless I am mistaken, they intend to reward you for what you did, Nancy. It wouldn't surprise me, but of course I'll not take money from them. However, if they should offer me a reward, I know what I shall ask for. What is that? Oh, you must wait and see. And Nancy laughed mysteriously. They haven't offered me anything yet. Before Carson Drew could quiz her, she skipped out the side door and vanished. Chapter 25. A Reward. I suppose you've heard about the Tompkins, Carson Drew remarked to his daughter one morning after some months after the reading of the Crowley will. Why, no. What about them? They're practically in bankruptcy. Richard Tompkins has been losing steadily on the stock market of late. After his failure to recover the Crowley fortune, the bank reduced his credit. He's been forced to give up his home on the avenue. No, really? How that must hurt Miss Tompkins and the two girls. Yes, it's undoubtedly a bitter pill to swallow. They are moving into a small house this week, and from now on they'll not be able to carry themselves so high. I hope they don't try to make any more trouble about the will, Nancy commented. Goodness knows they made enough already. The Tompkins had not given up the Crowley estate without a bitter battle. They had put forth the claim that the will Nancy had unearthed was a forged document, but they had been unable to prove their statement. The case had finally been thrown out of court. As administrator of the estate, Carson Drew had advanced the Horner girls and Abigail Rowan a portion of their inheritance. Several weeks before, Nancy had visited Abigail and was delighted to find her in surprisingly good health. She had secured medical attention, and a trained nurse was in constant attendance. I believe I'll run out into the country today and visit the Horner girls, Nancy told her father. They telephoned yesterday and asked me to come. They hinted they had something special to tell me. Perhaps they're going to reward you for finding the will, Mr. Drew suggested. Oh, it's been nearly a month since they said anything about it, Nancy returned carelessly. By this time they've probably forgotten all about it. After luncheon, she set off for the farmhouse in her blue roadster. It was a beautiful autumn, and Nancy Drew thoroughly enjoyed the ride. As she came within sight of the farmhouse, Nancy was astonished at the transformation which had taken place. The house had been given a fresh coat of white paint, and a bright green roof replaced the old one. The yard was well kept, and beds of hardy plants had been set out. The, in the barnyard, many new hen houses were going up. Perhaps the most surprising thing was the large number of chickens in evidence. Welcome to the chicken farm, Allie Horner cried enthusiastically as she ran from the house to greet Nancy. I never saw so many chickens in all my life, Nancy declared. All Leghorns, too, Allie told her proudly. By this time, Grace Horner had reached the roadster, and she too gave Nancy a hearty welcome. Allie is in her element these days, she laughed. She's putting in incubators, and from now on will raise nothing but high-grade fowls. You must see everything, Allie insisted. Nancy was piloted from one place to another. She saw the new chicken houses which were being built and the incubators, but the thing which pleased her the most was the realization that Allie and Grace were happy in their work. Well, I must be getting back to River Heights, she remarked it after a time. Oh, you can't go yet, Allie interposed with a quick glance at her sister. You tell her, Grace? We asked you here today for a special reason. Grace began a trifle awkwardly. You see, we've been thinking for a long time that we've never done a thing to show our appreciation for what you did. We've talked with the others, and everyone has agreed that we should reward. Oh, I don't want a reward, Nancy broke in. I wanted to help. Anyway, it was fun for me. But we wanted to do something really handsome, Ellie cried in disappointment. It doesn't seem fair not to give you a reward. There's only one way you can reward me if you really want to, Nancy said after a little hesitation. How? Allie and Grace demanded in one breath. Well, it may sound silly, but I would like to have the Crowley clock for my very own. And is that all you want? Grace questioned in disappointment. We'll be glad to give you 100 clocks if you will only take them. Just the old Crowley clock. That's all I care for. And if you particularly want it yourself, oh goodness no, Grace assured her quickly. It doesn't keep particularly good time. And we have more heirlooms now than we know what to do with. Wait a minute, and I'll get it for you. She disappeared inside the farmhouse, returning in a few minutes with the old-fashioned timepiece. She handed it to Nancy. You're more than welcome to it, she declared warmly. But it isn't a reward at all. It's the only reward I want, Nancy replied, smiling at the two Horner girls. I don't see what you want with the thing, Allie commented. It's not much to look at. Nancy did not reply at once, but gazed meditatively at the clock. Truly, it was not handsome, but for her it had a peculiar appeal. She could not explain to Allie and Grace just why she prized it, for her feeling was something she could not put into words. Certainly, she was attached to it because of its suggestion of her recent adventure. I wonder if I'll ever have another half so thrilling, Nancy thought. As she stood gazing wistfully at the old clock, she could not know that before many months had passed she would be involved in a mystery far more baffling than the one she had just solved. Her adventures, recounted in the next volume of the series, The Hidden Staircase, were before her. Nancy Drew did not have the power of projecting herself into the future, and yet as she looked down at the timepiece she seemed to know that exciting days were soon to come. I'll always prize this clock as a trophy of my first venture as a detective, she said quietly, turning to Allie and Grace. It will serve as a pleasant reminder of a thrilling adventure, and who knows, perhaps as a promise for the future. And that was the end of chapter 25 and the end of Nancy Drew #1, The Secret of the Old Clock. Please like and subscribe and have a good day.